don't leave me. I'll do anything.
If you save me, I'll be your wife. The lonely rancher trembled, and he did it. Have you ever stopped to think how far someone will go for love in the will to survive? What I'm about to tell you happened in the sweltering Texas Panhandle long ago, and it will give you shivers. A young woman of just 20 risked losing everything, even her own life. And a lonely rancher, strong, handsome, and etched with sorrow at just 28, was faced with the most difficult decision of his life. And I'll tell you now, what happened in the end will leave you in shock, because no one could have imagined that pain and suffering would be the very bond that would unite them forever. Before we begin, subscribe to Windswept Tales so you don't miss stories like this. Leave a like and share with someone you know will be moved. Now prepare yourself, because with every detail of this narrative, you'll feel as if you're living it with them. In the year 1937, in the hot and dry heart of Texas, the sun seemed to burn the very soul. The dust rose in the air and mixed with the tears of a young woman named Clara, her skin delicate, her hair loose as she ran in desperation down a hard-packed dirt road. Her feet stumbled, her dress was torn, and her wide eyes revealed a fear of death. Behind her, the sound of horses' hooves echoed like thunder. Men shouted her name, "Clara, get back here, you damn fool!" Their voices were charged with hatred and a sense of ownership. Her heart felt like it would leap from her chest, but she still ran, even knowing that every step could be her last. And that's where our story begins. In those parts of the Panhandle in 1937, everyone knew of a man named Silas Reed. At 28, he had broad shoulders, arms marked by hard labor, and the silence of a man who'd learned to talk more with the land than with people. His ranch was located beyond a stretch of sandy terrain between twisted juniper trees and scrub brush that had been contorted by the hot wind. His long, white-porched house, worn by rare rains, had an iron bell at the entrance that he would ring at dawn to call for temporary hands during the corn harvest or when cattle needed to be moved. But lately he worked almost always alone. I remember describing how his days would begin. Before the sun rose, he'd light the lantern, fill the pot with strong black coffee, and stand for a moment just listening to the sound of crickets and the leather of the harnesses creaking on their hooks. Then he'd run a hand over his hat, check the rifle leaning against the door, a precaution for a man who had seen too much, and head for the corral. He was a handsome man, the kind that life had sculpted with a hoe and the sun, but who carried a deep, unfathomable sadness in his eyes, a well of memories no one could reach. "Mornin', Silas." Sometimes old Jedediah, a neighbor from miles away, a man with a gentle voice, would appear. "Mornin'. Brought you that sack of salt. It's right here, and if you need men to vaccinate the cattle tomorrow, I'll send 2. "I appreciate it. I'll manage today." The conversation always died there by Silas's own will. It wasn't rudeness. It was the habit of a man who had learned to keep things to himself. They said he had lost his parents in a flash flood by the creek when the rain-swollen waters had taken the wooden bridge one stormy night. Others swore it was a vicious fever that took them in silence. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Since his loss, the main house had the voice of emptiness. He found solace in his work. He'd wake the livestock with the call, leave hay in the trough, check the fences, and cast an eye over the bean crop. At the end of the day, he'd sit on the porch to mend harnesses and sometimes listen to the distant hoofbeats of cowboys headed to the cattle markets in Fort Worth to sell hides and beef jerky. He brought almost nothing back from town: salt, kerosene, a scrap of cloth to mend a shirt. He didn't go to dances, didn't attend church on Sundays with the others. He stayed on his land as if respecting a grief that time had not yet broken. And yet, there was a kindness in him that would appear suddenly. I myself have told you that one night he heard a woman crying on the road. It was Mrs. Miller, the wife of his neighbor Ben, with a bad infection in her foot. Silas saddled his horse, took them both to the town doctor, and returned without telling anyone. Another time, when the drought was at its worst, he shared the corn he had stored for his cattle with 3 families nearby, but he asked for secrecy. "This isn't to be spoken of," he simply said. It was his way, hard on the outside, a heart burning bright on the inside. "Need some help, son?" a ranch hand once asked at the gate, seeing him alone, raising a new fence. No, I'm good, Silas replied, driving a fence post into the ground. What a man starts, he finishes. Behind that phrase was a silent promise he had made to himself, never again to lose what was left. The ranch, the memory of his parents, the ground that supported his steps. Everything was cared for with a son's devotion. And yet, that week, a rumor began to spread in the local saloons. A wealthy landowner from the city, a man with a fiery temper and a posse of enforcers, was offering a lot of money to find a young woman who had run away from an arranged marriage. The panhandle knows the weight of names. Where enforcers ride, people hide. Silas heard the talk silently, but he filed the message away in his mind, like a man who stores matches on a windy day. One crimson evening, the heat seemed to burn even the shadows. Silas finished his rounds in the pastures and, on his way back, leaned his saddle against the fence. His large, calloused hands hung in the air for a moment, as if sensing something. I can't explain it, but sometimes the land gives a warning. The wind's whisper changed, bringing a taste of dust and urgency. From the side of the road, he first heard a dry snap, maybe a breaking branch, and then the hurried trot of horses mixed with the sound that would send a shiver down anyone's spine. A woman's scream. It wasn't just any cry. It was a plea for help torn from a throat, the kind that the entire land hears and falls silent to. For heaven's sake, Silas murmured, with the start of a man who recognizes pain before he knows its name. He grabbed his rifle in one fluid motion and ran to the gate, his chest already pounding in the same rhythm as the approaching hoofbeats. There, on the edge of the hard-packed dirt road, his story began to deviate from the path he had set for himself. And if you've stayed with me this far, know this. It's at this meeting that Silas's life will be split into a before and an after. And later, I'll reveal something to you that changes the meaning of every promise yet to be made. I remember it as if I'm seeing it now. Silas ran to the gate with his rifle in one hand and his heart in the other. The dirt road, red from the late afternoon sun, vibrated with the approaching trot. That's when he saw her, staggering through the dust, a very pale 20-year-old woman, her face streaked with dust and tears, her light-colored breast torn at the knee. She tried to speak, but the words came out in a whisper. "Water, please." Silas dropped the gate latch, ran and supported the woman by her shoulders. She smelled of smoke and sweat, mixed with fear. He offered his canteen, and she drank in small, trembling sips. Only then did she look up at him, her eyes large and frantic, the eyes of someone who has seen death up close. "My name is Clara," she said, gasping for air. They're going to kill me." She gestured with her eyes to the road behind her. In the distance, a higher cloud of dust rose like the trail of a pack of wolves. The land doesn't lie about these signs. He hardened his jaw. "Who's behind you, miss?" "Enforcers. From the man they want to force me to marry. I ran away. I won't go back." She held his arm with unexpected strength. "If you save me, I'll be your wife." The phrase hung in the air, heavy as a bell in the wind. Silas felt a shiver run through him, not from fear, but from the shock of a promise spoken in a rush. It touched a part of him that had been silent for years, and still he didn't look away. "No one lays a hand on someone who came here asking for help," he said firmly. "But you have to trust me." On the other side of the fence, Silas's horse snorted impatiently, as if it too sensed the urgency. He helped Clara to her feet and with careful urgency led her to the porch. The lantern, already lit, cast a gentle circle of light on the brick floor. Silas moistened a cloth, cleaned the wound on her knee, and they stood in silence for a moment, listening to their own breathing. "Does it hurt much?" he asked. "It hurts, but I can take it," Clara said, her lips tight with resolve. "Just don't let me go back. He's a cruel man." Silas lowered his face to tie the cloth on her leg and spoke softly and almost like a prayer. "No one goes back to cruelty." Clara, still trembling, placed her hand over his, a simple gesture that broke an old wall in the rancher's chest. For a moment, the vast, always silent land seemed to breathe with them. But the world outside gave them no time for comfort. One crack, two, then three shots in the distance, sharp, cutting through the fading afternoon. "Are they close?" Clara whispered. "They are," Silas replied, standing up. And from now on, what happens here happens to me too. He went to the corner of the porch, grabbed his rifle, stuffed cartridges into his pants pocket, and whistled a short call for his horse to come to the door. He returned to Clara, his voice gentle but without hesitation. I'll put you on the back. We'll take the creek detour and disappear into the thicket. If there's time, we'll stop at the barn and grab provisions. If not, I'll improvise. Trust me. I trust you, she said with a courage born of her own distress. And if you save me, I swear my life will be yours. Silas looked at her again. There was respect in his gaze, not possession. There was also something he couldn't name. Perhaps the memory of everything he had lost. Perhaps the chance to finally save someone other than himself. In the yard, the hoofbeats grew distinct. Rough voices, short laughs from men who fed on fear. Clara put her hand to her mouth, but Silas just opened the wooden gate, stepped into the stirrup, and extended his arm. Get on now. I'm ready. She rose, he settled her firmly against him, and the horse, as if understanding the command before it heard it, danced its hooves ready to bolt. When the first shadows of the men appeared around the bend, Silas dug his heels into the animal's flank and paused for just a single second. A decision passed entirely through his eyes, the kind that changes the course of a life. And then he did something no one in that region would have thought possible for a man on his own. But I'll tell you about that in the next part, because it's right here, exactly here, that the story takes a deep breath before it plunges in. And further on, I will still reveal something that will make you see every one of Silas's gestures and every one of Clara's words in a completely different way. Now tell me what city you're watching this story from. I really want to know who's sharing this emotion with us. The brown horse bolted into a gallop, and the sound of his hooves echoed on the dirt road like war drums. With every jump, dust rose behind them, forming a curtain that tried to hide the fleeing pair. Clara, holding onto Silas's waist, felt her heart beat faster than the gallop itself. The wind hit her face, bringing the taste of dirt and the dry smell of the approaching night. Behind them, the enforcers didn't take long to appear. There were 5 men on fast horses, shouting curses and firing shots randomly, trying to hit the silhouettes of the fugitives. The pop of the bullets sliced through the air, raised sparks on the rocks, and echoed the danger that pursued them. "Hold on tight, Clara," Silas shouted, leaning forward, whipping the air with the reins. "If we fall now, we won't get up again." "I won't let go," she replied, her voice choked but firm. "If I have to die, let it be with you." Silas felt a shiver run down his spine. This woman he barely knew was already entrusting her entire life to his hands, and it was that trust that made him resist. He pulled the horse toward the creek detour, a narrow and dangerous shortcut lined with thorny bushes and loose rocks. Few knew that path, but he had ridden it countless times in his solitude. The horse slipped on a smooth stone, almost tumbling, but Silas steadied it with a masterful hand. The confident enforcers followed behind, but 2 of them ended up falling while trying to keep up on the treacherous ground. The sound of their falls echoed in the distance, mixed with curses and cries of pain. Still, 3 continued the chase. Clara looked back from time to time and saw the flashes of gunfire lighting up the darkness that was already settling in. "They won't give up," she said, weeping. "They never give up." "As long as I'm breathing, they won't touch you," Silas replied, his voice low and determined. The horse ran as if it were part of the rancher's soul. At every turn, Silas found a detour, a shadow, an improvised hiding place. Finally, after minutes that seemed like an eternity, they reached an old wooden bridge over the creek. Silas made the animal cross, but before the enforcers arrived, he kicked out one of the loose planks. The bridge, already rotted by time, gave way with a crash, trapping the pursuers on the other side. Breathing hard, Silas stopped the horse in a small clearing surrounded by twisted trees. He helped Clara dismount, and they both fell to their knees by the water's edge, taking deep breaths as if they had just been reborn. "You risked everything for me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't thank me," Silas replied, looking at the reddish sky. "I just did what a man has to." Clara moved closer, holding his hand tightly. "I'll never forget what you did today. Never." And in that moment, in the silence of the land and the distant sound of crickets announcing the night, an invisible alliance was sealed between them. It wasn't just a flight, it was destiny. The suffering that surrounded them was uniting their souls in a way neither of them yet understood. As the stars appeared in the sky, the rancher knew that this chase had been only the beginning. The real war was still to come. When the brown horse finally slowed its pace, night had already fallen. The moon etched the land in long shadows, and only the rustling of the wind in the dry branches accompanied the silence. Silas, sweaty and his chest heaving, led Clara to his ranch. The main house stood alone in the middle of the darkness, white and silent, as if it, too, held a secret. He dismounted first, then extended his arms to help her down. Clara, exhausted, let her body lean against him, and Silas held her firmly. There was blood running from her knee mixed with dust, and her face was marked with scratches. "Let's go inside, miss. You're safe here," Silas said, opening the door with his shoulder, his hands busy holding Hero. The inside of the house smelled of old wood and cold coffee. He settled her in a rocking chair on the porch, ran to the kitchen, and brought a basin of clean water. Clara could barely keep her eyes open, but when he pressed the damp cloth to her forehead, she sighed as if the pain had relented. "You shouldn't have brought me here. Your life is also at risk," she murmured, her voice weak. "My life has always been at risk. The land doesn't forgive anyone," he replied, carefully wiping away the blood. "But what's the point of living if it's not to protect someone?" She looked at him deeply, surprised by that phrase. Silas was a man of few words, but every one that came out of his mouth carried weight. "My father," Clara tried to say, but her throat closed. "He sold me as if I were a sack of goods. I wouldn't accept it. I'd rather die than have that marriage." Silas clenched his fists, feeling anger burn in his veins. His gaze swept over the young woman's fragile face and stopped at the bruise on the corner of her mouth. There was proof that she had already been mistreated. "No one has the right to treat you like that," he said firmly. "As long as I'm alive, they won't lay a hand on you." Clara held his hand tightly, as if that contact were the only anchor keeping her in the world. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of despair, but of an unexpected trust. Silas, used to living in silence, felt something different inside him. The ranch, which had always been an empty place, seemed to have a life of its own that night. The creaking of the rocking chair, the distant sound of crickets, Clara's breathing. Everything formed a new scene that he couldn't explain, but that held him in an irreversible way. "You need to rest," he said, helping her lie down in a simple, tidy room. "Tomorrow we'll think about what to do." Clara closed her eyes slowly, and before falling asleep, she whispered, "Thank you, you're my savior." Silas stood at the door, watching her for a few moments. Then he went out to the porch, lit a hand-rolled cigarette, and looked at the dark horizon. He didn't know that choice would change the course of his life forever. But that night, for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was not alone. If this part of the story has already touched your heart, leave a like, because it shows me that you want to follow this emotional drama to the end, a drama that still holds surprising twists. The sun rose timidly that morning, illuminating the ranch with a golden light that passed through the gaps in the wooden window. The distant crowing of roosters and the lowing of cattle announced another ordinary day. But inside that house, nothing would be the same. Clara woke up slowly, smelling the fresh coffee that Silas had already prepared. For a moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare. But when she looked at her own bruised body, she realized that reality was even more cruel. Silas entered the room slowly, carrying a steaming mug. He seemed more tired than usual, as if he hadn't slept at all during the night. "I brought coffee. It'll help you get your strength back," he said, placing the mug on the small table next to the bed. Clara sat up slowly, propping herself up on the pillow. Her eyes were still red, but they held a flicker of determination. She drank the coffee in silence, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Silas, I need to tell you the truth." He pulled up a chair and sat on the edge of the bed, his arms crossed. His expression was serious, but his attentive eyes showed respect. "Go ahead, no one's going to silence you here." Clara swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. "My father, he promised me in marriage to a very wealthy man, Colonel Jackson. A cruel man, used to buying everything and everyone. I didn't want it, Silas. He's old enough to be my grandfather. I won't be anyone's property." Her voice cracked, and tears began to fall again. Silas, awkwardly, reached out and lightly touched her fingers, a simple gesture that conveyed more strength than any words could. "And those men who were chasing you, were they his?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "They were enforcers paid to drag me back. He swore that if I ran away, he'd make my life a living hell." Silas pressed his lips together and was silent for a while. The land was too small to hide someone from a man like Jackson. The landowners of that time had power greater than the law itself. But when he looked at Clara, he saw not just a scared girl, but a woman willing to face the impossible to defend her freedom. "You were right to run," he finally said. "Better to face death than to live chained." Clara looked up at him, surprised by the firmness of that phrase. "You really believe that?" "I do," Silas replied, "because I've seen what it's like to lose everything and keep breathing without a reason to live. That's what it means to die while still alive." Clara fell silent, digesting those words. For the first time, someone understood her pain without judging her. And in that moment, a mutual trust was born between them. An invisible bond, but as strong as beaten iron. She moved a little closer, her voice coming out in a whisper. "I don't know what will happen to my life now, but I know I don't want to go back. I'd rather take the destiny God gives me alongside a just man than live in luxury next to a tyrant." Silas didn't answer right away. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the arid horizon. Inside, he was fighting a battle. Protecting Clara meant challenging a power that could destroy his ranch, his life, and even the memory of his family. But at the same time, there was no going back. "Then stay," he finally said, without turning his face. "Stay and trust me. If they come for you, they'll have to go through me first." Clara smiled through her tears, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She knew that this man, no matter how lonely he was, had a heart big enough to shelter her pain. At that moment, the ranch ceased to be just Silas's refuge. It also became the sanctuary of Clara's hope. And together, even without realizing it, they began to write a new page in their lives. A page marked by pain, but also by the possibility of a love that would be born in the flames of injustice. And that's how Clara's secret also became Silas's burden. That same day, after Clara's revelation, Silas went out into the ranch yard, pacing back and forth, his hat crushed in his hands. The dry wind blew hot, bringing with it the memory of her words. The silence of the land, which had so often been a comfort to him, now weighed on him like a sentence. He knew that sheltering Clara was more than just giving a fugitive a place to stay. It was a direct challenge to Colonel Jackson, a powerful man who owned land, enforcers, and an influence that extended far beyond his own gates. Jackson did not forgive those who defied him. And if Silas chose to protect that young woman, he would put his life, his ranch, and even the memory of his family at risk. Clara came out the porch door and found him there with a distant look. She walked to him, still limping from the wound on her knee. "Silas," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I won't blame you if you send me away. I've already brought enough misfortune into your life." He turned slowly, his eyes shining with a mix of pain and determination. "And if I send you away, where will you go? Back to your father's house? Back to the colonel's yoke?" "No, Clara, I can't do that." She took a deep breath, moved. "Then what will become of us?" "That's what I've been asking myself since you walked through that gate," he replied, clenching his hat in his hands. The dilemma gnawed at him. If he stayed alone, he could continue his life in silence, maybe even forget that night. But now there was something different inside him. The solitude that once seemed a sanctuary had turned into a prison. Clara's presence had turned his soul upside down. He turned back to her, his voice grave. "If I fight for you, they'll try to destroy everything I have. They'll burn my fields, kill my cattle, take the ranch that was my father's." "And if you don't fight?" she asked, looking him in the eyes. "Will you live with the weight of having handed me over to a tyrant?" Clara's words echoed inside him like thunder. Silas felt his chest burn as if his heart were about to explode. So there was no easy way out, but one certainty grew. He could not let injustice win. "Then so be it," he finally said with firmness. "If they come, let them. I won't hand you over." Clara brought her hand to her face, covering the tears that insisted on falling. She moved closer to him and whispered, "You don't know how much that means to me." For a moment, the world stopped. The silence of the land no longer seemed heavy, but complicit. It was as if even the wind understood that something new was being decided there. In that dilemma, Silas discovered that it wasn't just Clara who needed protection. He himself needed her to rediscover the meaning of life. And it was at that instant that, amidst the pain and fear, a silent promise was born. They would fight together, no matter the cost. Now tell me, if you were in Silas's shoes, would you risk everything to protect someone you just met? Or would you choose the path of security and solitude? Leave your answer in the comments. The days that followed were unlike anything Silas had ever lived in the solitude of the ranch. Clara, even though she was still bruised, insisted on helping with the small chores. In the morning, she'd light the wood-burning stove, make coffee, and warm the bread he made in a batch. The smell of fresh food returned to fill the house, which had always been silent and empty before. Silas watched her from a distance, as if afraid to get too close, but he couldn't deny that something in him changed with every discreet smile, with every simple gesture from her. When Clara laughed, even quietly, it seemed as if the walls of the ranch responded, echoing with life. One afternoon, while Silas was mending a harness on the porch, Clara appeared carrying a bucket of clothes to wash. She sat on a low bench and began to scrub the fabrics with force, as if she wanted to erase all the marks of the past from them. Silas, curious, broke the silence. "You've never worked like this, have you?" he asked, looking at her out of the corner of his eye. "My father always surrounded me with servants. I just had to smile and obey, but I don't want that life anymore. I want to be useful. I want to be free." Silas put down the harness leather and stared at her. "No one orders you around here, but no one lives without effort either. The land doesn't forgive laziness." "Then let me learn," Clara replied firmly, scrubbing the clothes until her hands were raw. He came closer, held her fingers to stop her from continuing. His hands were large and calloused, but in that moment they became gentle as they touched her bruised ones. "You don't need to hurt yourself to prove anything. You're already stronger than you imagine." Clara's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her as more than a pretty face or a bargaining chip. As the days passed, Clara learned to milk, to plant beans, to sweep the porch, to prepare the simple food that sustained Silas on his journeys. And with every gesture, Silas discovered that life could be shared, that it wasn't necessary to carry the weight of the world alone. At night, they'd sit on the porch, looking at the stars. Clara would tell stories of when she was a girl, of the town festivals, of the nights she dreamed of being the master of her own destiny. Silas, in return, said little, but when he did, he would reveal childhood memories with his parents, of the horse he raised from a colt, of the pride in caring for the land he inherited. "Have you ever loved anyone, Silas?" Clara asked once, staring at the sky. He took a long time to answer. "I loved what I lost. Ever since then, I've kept my heart closed." "And now?" she insisted in a low voice. He turned and met her eyes, which were shining in the moonlight. He didn't say anything, just placed his hand over hers. The silence spoke louder, and in that simple gesture, an unexpected love was born, planted in pain, but watered by hope. A love that grew like a root in dry earth, resilient, deep, and impossible to pull out. On the ranch, between the smell of land moistened by passing showers and the distant song of birds, Silas and Clara discovered that, even in the midst of fear and suffering, life was still capable of blossoming. The afternoon turned heavy, with low clouds, as if the sky knew what was to come. Silas ran his hand over the harnesses, checked the gate latch, and swept his gaze across the horizon. The silence of the land that usually gave him peace now sounded strange, like a held breath. Clara came from the wood-burning stove with a cloth on her shoulders and stopped beside him, trying to read the rancher's face. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I did. The wind changed," Silas said, tilting his head as if listening to a very distant voice. "Tonight calls for caution." They had agreed on simple signals: 3 knocks on the window to open, 2 to stay closed. Clara knew every corner that could serve as a shelter. Silas would keep his rifle and a hunting knife within reach. The brown horse was fed early and kept in the stable, its coat shining under the faint light of the lantern. The animal pawed the ground, restless as if it too sensed the coming storm. The first hour of the night passed calmly, and the second as well. In the third, the world turned upside down. A flash of light appeared far away, then another and another. Torches, the snap of breaking branches, footsteps, short, dry laughs, the trot of horses marking the earth, the ranch surrounded. "Clara," Silas called, already with his rifle in his hands. "Get to the back of the house, behind the wooden chest. You know the way." "I'm going," she replied, breathing fast but not losing her courage, tearing a splinter from the doorframe. Silas rolled back behind the porch pillar and returned fire with a sharp, precise shot that blew up one of the men's torches and plunged a part of the yard into darkness. Shouts, a scramble, another shot, another. The house's wood groaned but stood firm. "Get out of there, cowboy," a rough voice roared from outside. "Hand over the girl and keep your skin." "There's no merchandise here," Silas's voice cut through the air, firm. "Go back the way you came." The second wave came. Two enforcers advanced from the back, trying to climb over the corral fence. Silas ran inside the house and, through the kitchen window, shot at their lantern post. The explosion spread kerosene and fear. The men retreated, cursing. That's when a third man crept closer and threw a lit torch toward the stable. The fire caught as if it were waiting for an invitation, licking the dry straw, running through the hay, spitting sparks into the sky. "No!" Silas felt his chest burn. The brown horse neighed loudly, a sound that sliced through the rancher's soul. Clara, hearing the neigh and the crackling wood, took a step forward in the dark hallway. "Alyssa's horse!" "Go back, Clara." He extended his hand in the air as if he could hold her. "Stay right where you are." The heat grew in a whisper, then became a fist. The stable twisted smoke from its roof ridge, and a piece of the roof tile broke loose, then another and another. Outside, the shadows moved with the fire, dancing in the yard like panicked devils. The enforcers realized their advantage and began to close in, taking advantage of the light that betrayed Silas's every move. "Finish him!" someone shouted, closer than before. Silas grabbed Clara by the arm, led her to the agreed-upon hiding spot behind the old chest. Their eyes met for a long second, full of unspoken things. "Listen, if I don't come back, you run down the side hallway, go under the floorboards, and come out near the juniper tree. Head straight for the creek. Do you understand?" "Don't talk like that," she whispered. Her voice choked. "I won't leave without you." "You will if I tell you to." He took a breath, swallowing the taste of smoke. "Trust me one more time." Another crack. Part of the stable's wood gave way, spitting out a larger tongue of fire, and the neighing turned to desperation. Silas closed his eyes for a blink of faith. The horse was a living memory of everything he had been. It was the last thing left of his father. And at the same time behind him, hidden in the shadows, was Clara, the new life that was just beginning right there. "Silas," her voice came small but firm. "I'm with you." He listened again to the hurried footsteps on the side of the house. No, 4. Someone was limping, the fire hissing loudly, the heat hitting his face, the sweet and cruel smell of burning wood. The decision rose whole before him, like a wall with no steps. Silas pulled his hat back, planted his feet on the hard ground, felt his heart pound in his temples, and paused. A second that seemed like an eternity. On one side, the burning stable and the friend of his entire life. On the other, the woman he had sworn to protect. The world held its breath, and it was at this exact point that the night opened its abyss. Silas's next step would change everything. The past, the present, and even what he didn't yet know about himself. The entire land, if it had heard, would have fallen silent to listen to the choice that was being born. Now I ask you, have you subscribed to Windswept Tales so you don't miss the next stories to come? The fire advanced with a living fury, consuming the stable as if it wanted to swallow not just the wood, but also the memories that lived there. The brown horse, Silas's faithful companion, neighed loudly, a cry that mingled with the crackling of the flames. It was the last direct link he had with his father, with his childhood, and with the memory of everything he had lost. But behind him, inside the house, was Clara. trembling and scared, but standing, waiting for the decision of the man who had taken her in. Silas felt his chest tighten as never before. His eyes went from the door of the burning stable to the dark corner of the room where Clara was huddled. His hands held the rifle tightly, but his heart was in a different war. To save the horse was to save a memory. To save Clara was to save a life. Clara, noticing his hesitation, took a step forward. Her tear-filled eyes met his with an unexpected force. "Silas, don't go!" she shouted, her voice tearing through the air. "If you go into that fire, you'll never come back." He closed his eyes for an instant. The sound of the fire was like a beast's roar, and the horse's neighing hurt his soul like a blade. But the memory of what he had heard from Clara days before when she confessed that she would rather die than be handed over came to him like lightning. Here was a woman who had lost everything, but who still believed in life. And it was this life that he could not abandon. "Forgive me, old friend," he murmured, looking at the stable one last time. He turned his body and ran to Clara. He held her firmly by the shoulders, almost brutally, as if he were afraid she would disappear before his eyes. "Come with me, now!" The smoke was already beginning to enter through the cracks, choking the air. Silas dragged Clara to the back door, kicked the door frame, and opened the way. The two of them darted outside, crossing the garden plot illuminated by the growing flames. Behind them, the stable gave way with loud snaps, and the horse let out one last neigh that echoed through the field like a lament. Clara stumbled, but Silas lifted her into his arms, running with the strength of a man who carries not just a body, but a destiny. The sound of the enforcers was still close, their rough voices trying to coordinate an attack. But for a few minutes, all that could be heard was the crackle of the fire and Clara's muffled sobs against Silas's chest. When they reached a more distant part of the yard, they stopped under a dry tree. Clara was sobbing, but she tried to speak. "You left him? You left your horse?" Silas took a deep breath, feeling his heart grow heavy as a stone. "I left a part of me back there, Clara, but I couldn't leave you." She rested her head on his shoulder, crying softly. The pain was immense, but in that pain, there was also something that united them indestructibly. Both had lost, both had bled in different ways, but now they were side by side, facing the darkness together. Silas's choice was cruel but necessary. He understood, in the midst of the flames, that the past had already taken enough from him. The present, no matter how painful, still offered him a chance to protect someone who was alive, who was breathing, who needed him. And that night, marked by loss, a decision was born that would change the course of their story. Their lives would never be separated again. Not by pain, not by the threat of men, not by the memories of what was gone. The suffering was slowly becoming the thread that sewed their souls together. The early morning hours dragged on heavily when Silas and Clara arrived at the edge of the creek. The moon reflected on the running water, silvering the sweat and blood that ran down his chest. During the escape, one of the shots fired by the enforcers had finally hit him, piercing his shoulder. He tried to hide the pain, but his body was already starting to give out. Clara, seeing him stumble, ran to support him. "Silas, you're bleeding too much." He took a deep breath, pressing the wound with his own calloused hand. "It's just a scratch," he said, trying to pretend, but his face revealed the seriousness of it. Clara wept, but not out of despair, out of anger and helplessness. This man had sacrificed everything, his peace, his horse, even his own life, and now he was stumbling before her. "Why did you do this?" she asked, pressing his shirt against the wound to staunch the blood. "Why did you risk so much for me?" Silas looked into her eyes with a light that mixed pain and tenderness. "Because you gave me back something I had already lost. You brought me back to life." She held his face with both hands, the tears falling uncontrollably. "You're not going to die. You won't. I won't let you." At that moment, the distant sound of voices echoed again. The enforcers were still close, sniffing out their trail. Clara looked into the darkness of the bushes and then at Silas's face. She had to act. "I'll carry you, even if it's in my arms," she said with determination. With effort, she lifted him as much as she could and, stumbling, took him to a thicket where she hid him. She tore a part of her own skirt and tied it around his shoulder, improvising a tourniquet. "You're not going to die, Silas, because I need you." she murmured as if each word were a prayer. The man, even in his weakness, smiled faintly. You've already saved me, Clara, more than you know. His sacrifice wasn't just for the body that was failing, but for the new life that was blossoming in the midst of the tragedy. He knew that from then on, even if he didn't survive, Clara's courage would be the flame that carried his memory. The land held its silence around them, as if even nature respected that scene. The love born from pain was written there in the spilled blood and in the tears that fell on the dry earth. And now I want to know from you who's following this story. Does this young woman deserve justice? Then leave justice for Clara in the comments. The creek water ran gently, but every drop seemed to carry the weight of that night. I remember the smell of wet earth, the distant glow of the burning stable, and the rhythmic sound of Silas's breath beginning to fail. Clara, with her torn dress and trembling hands, held his head in her lap as one protects a secret. The blood ran warm, staining the hem of her skirt. Stay with me, she whispered, her mouth close to his forehead. You're going to stay with me. Silas tried to open his eyes, managing a half smile, the kind that hurts more than it helps. It's just a bullet graze. It'll pass in a bit. Don't lie to me. Clara tightened the makeshift cloth on his shoulder. The truth, Silas, the truth. He took a deep breath, gasping for air. The truth is I've lost a lot, Clara, but I don't want to lose you. A heavy silence fell. The entire land seemed to listen. Then, as if an old memory lit up inside her, Clara raised her face and spoke with a firmness, word by word, without trembling. On the road, when I thought I was going to die more, I said, if you save me, I'll be your wife. I repeat it now, before God and the night. If you live, if you get up from this ground, I'll be your wife. I'll carry this house on my shoulders with you, even if it's just with the tip of my finger. Silas closed his eyes again, like a man receiving care he doesn't know. His heavy eyelids didn't hide the tear that escaped, mixed with the dust of the road. I didn't save you for that. I know, she replied firmly. And because I know, I choose to save you now. Clara moved quickly, pulling from memory everything she had ever seen the women of the land do on a night of urgency. She washed the wound with the cool creek water, tore off another piece of her dress, and tied it under his armpit to staunch the bleeding. It's going to sting, she warned, bringing the weak flame of a candle stump she had in her pocket. But it's the best I can do. It stings less than losing you, he murmured. The smell of burning fabric rose in a wisp of smoke. Silas gritted his teeth, his whole body tense. When the pain subsided, Clara rested his head on her own shoulder, rocking him as if it were possible to trick the dawn. We need people, she said, looking around. You once talked about Ben and Mrs. Miller, about 2 miles down the creek. A cabin with mud walls, a dog that barks without teeth, and a bell hanging from a twisted branch, he confirmed softly. Then let's go. Clara helped him to his feet. He was a large, heavy man, but she found strength where there had only been fear before. Step by step, they made their way through the sparse vegetation, following the bank in the shadow of the junipers. In the distance, the voices of the enforcers had become a buzz, as if the night had decided to protect them for a few moments. When they spotted the cabin, Clara tapped the bell 3 times lightly and waited. The door creaked open, and the light of a lantern outlined Mrs. Miller's sleep-creased face. Dear Lord, the old woman said, bringing her hand to her chest. Silas, what did they do to you? Just need a place to stay for a bit, ma'am, he said, his voice hoarse. Then I'll be on my way. On your way to where? Mrs. Miller opened the door wide without asking anything else. Get in now, Ben. Hot water, clean cloths, and get that bottle of feverfew root. They laid Silas on a mat. The smell of herbs and alcohol filled the room. Ben arrived with a basin of water, and the 2 women began the work of cleaning, tightening, tying, and praying. Clara never left his side. Whenever Silas's eyes blinked slowly, she would repeat softly, like a vow that accepts no revocation. I'm here. I'm yours. Hours dragged on. When his pulse finally stopped racing, it was as if the cabin breathed again. The pain hadn't gone away, but it had lost its urgency. Mrs. Miller leaned against the door frame, tired. That man is only alive because God has a plan for him. God has a plan for both of us, Clara replied without taking her hand from his chest. Silas opened his eyes, now clearer, looked for Clara's face, and found it. You've got me tied down, haven't you? I have, she smiled faintly. I've tied you with cloth, with prayer, and with a promise. Remember it? I remember, he said, taking a deep breath. And that night, the promise stopped being a desperate cry and became a direction. It was no longer, if you save me, I'll be your wife, said in a rush on the brink of death. It was, let's live, whatever the pain, said with their feet planted firmly on the dirt floor of a mud-walled cabin, before two simple witnesses and a sky of stars that looked down from above the roof. When the first streak of morning light hit the window, Clara finally rested her head next to his, hand in hand, finger to finger, like someone sealing what they've said. Outside, the toothless dog snored, and the bell on the branch stopped swinging. The world was still dangerous. The colonel still had a long reach, and the grief for the horse was still gnawing at them both inside. But there was a pact, and I tell you, it was at this time, exactly this time, that destiny found the shortcut through which the twist was going to come. It wasn't visible yet, but it was already on its way with the steps of people and the courage of a community. The day was born pale, and the light gently hit the mud wall of Ben's cabin. Silas was in a shallow sleep, his body still fighting the pain, when the tinkling of the small bell on the dry branch cut through the silence. It wasn't the wind, it was hands. 3 short taps, then 2 more, an old neighborhood signal. Mrs. Miller opened the door slowly. Outside, shadows that became people appeared. Jedediah, the ranch hand Joe, the sisters Sally and Rose, John from the creek, old man Felicity with the rifle he inherited from his father. They came from all over, quiet, hats in hand, as if entering a church. Is what's been said on the road true? Jedediah asked, his voice caught in his throat. That the colonel's men set fire to your stable, Silas? Silas tried to get up. Clara helped him, her arms serving as a support. It's true, he replied softly, and they won't stop. Joe set his jaw. Well, today the door turns into a barricade. To get in, they'll have to knock down neighbor by neighbor. A murmur of agreement. It wasn't a shout, it was assent. These simple people owed a lot to Silas's quiet kindness. The corn he shared during the drought, the water drawn from a well on a night of urgency, the calf returned without a reward, the medicine he lent without asking for a date. The lonely rancher was never alone. He just didn't know it. This was the first twist. They organized themselves as if they were preparing for a patron saints festival, but in reverse. John from the creek brought ropes. Sally and Rose cut sheets for bandages and dressings. Joe taught them a ranch hand's trick to take down a horse without hurting the animal, stretching a low rope taut across a narrow passage. Felicity slowly showed them how to scatter broken glass on the trail without it shining in the sun. Ben got an old bugle. When I play it, you let the small herd loose, he explained, pointing to the narrow ravine before the broken bridge. They won't expect a small herd in the middle of the path. If the cattle come, they'll get lost. Clara, standing, held Silas's hand. I'm going with them. You're staying? Silas tried to stop her. No, she said, looking him in the eyes. I'm not going to live in hiding anymore. It was because of my name that they came. It's with my name that I'm going to face them. No one argued. There was a new firmness in that young woman. Mrs. Miller tied the cloth better on Silas's shoulder, and before leaving, she rested her forehead against his like a mother giving a blessing. Stay alive. We'll take care of the rest. When the sun had risen a handbreadth above the hill, the first silhouettes of enforcers appeared at the edge of the path. They came in 4s, then in 6s, testing the terrain. They laughed short, the laugh of men who believe that fear opens gates. But that day, the gate had an owner, and the owner was a lot of people. Ben's bugle sounded a deep, drawn-out note, like lightning called from a mouth. From the middle of the brush, the small cattle scattered into a herd, heads low, steps quick. The enforcers' horses stumbled, backed away. At the same instant, the low rope stretched by John and Joe caught 2 of them by surprise. It didn't take them down to kill them, but to humiliate them, which hurts more. The sisters Sally and Rose, nimble, threw blankets over the faces of the fallen, a market trick. While Felicity from the shadows fired a shot into the air, just to remind them that a gun also lived there. "Who sent you here?" Jedediah shouted without trembling. One of the men, the youngest, hesitated, looked around, calculated the ruin, and lowered his revolver. I, I have a mother," he murmured, throwing his gun on the ground. Another spat on the ground, but his voice came out smaller. "The order is from Colonel Jackson. He said the girl is his, by word of honor." Clara took a step forward, her simple dress, her posture erect. "I'm not anyone's property," she said clearly. "I am a woman with a will, and I'm of age, and if the law won't reach me, let the courage of the people to reach me." Then something unexpected happened within the unexpected. One of the remaining enforcers, a man with a scarred face and hollow eyes, raised his hand in a gesture of truce. "I know you, rancher." He pointed his chin at Silas. "It was your people who helped my sister when the smallpox almost took her. I came to put you on the ground." "I won't anymore." "Then let go of the weight of the crime," Joe retorted. "Go tell your boss that there's no kneeling on this land." The man nodded, dismounted, and in silence crossed the path on foot, disappearing around the bend, his arms raised, as if surrendering to his own heart. The others, seeing that the tide had turned, retreated defeated, taking the fallen with them without looking back. The dust settled slowly, and with it, the scare. The people breathed one by one as if coming back to life. Clara walked to Silas, who had watched the scene with a tense face and clenched fists. She knelt beside him, rested her forehead against his, and the two of them stayed there quietly, breathing the same air. It wasn't a victory, it was a breath. But a breath on this land is worth its weight in gold. "Did you see, she whispered. "You're not alone." "I never was," he replied, as if he finally understood his own destiny. "It was the people who created me all over again." There would still be a reckoning. A colonel doesn't forget a slight. But that morning the old cycle cracked. Silas's solitude took on the body of a crowd, and fear, cornered, showed that it too knows how to retreat. This was the twist. When it seemed that everything was the strength of one man alone, it was discovered that there were many hands holding the same rope. At the end of the day, Ben took an old painting of St. Joseph the worker from a hook and placed it on the wooden table, surrounded by bread, coffee, and grateful silence. Clara held her mug with both hands, warming her fingers. Silas drank slowly, his shoulder throbbing, but his heart at a peace he hadn't known for years. "Tomorrow we start again," he said. "Tomorrow we start better," Clara corrected with gentle firmness. "And as the night returned to cover the ground with its dark blanket, I say, it was then that the thread of the story began to pull at what was hidden, because the truth, the whole truth, had not yet been told. And it was on its way, slow and certain, to settle the accounts that time had not paid. What was missing to make their love a fearless shelter was just one dawn away. The sun rose in the panhandle, bringing not only light, but also justice. Days after the rebuilding, the news spread quickly. Colonel Jackson, pressured by the community and finally reported to the authorities, had to back down. The fear he spread dissolved like smoke. It was as if Silas and Clara's courage had opened the way for others to stand up as well. On the ranch, now alive again, Clara cared for the new horse, Hope, while Silas, still with his arm in recovery, walked through the yard with firm steps. With every detail, the house smiled again. The smell of bread coming out of the oven, her voice singing softly, the people visiting without fear. The place that once held silence was now a home of hope. One afternoon, Clara stopped in front of the man who had given everything for her. "Silas, when I got here, I was only fear. Now by your side, I am life." He held her face, tears in his strong eyes, and replied, "And I who was only solitude, now I am the two of us." They kissed on the porch with the warm Texas wind carrying away the old pains. It was a kiss that sealed not only love, but also triumph. Every tear, every loss, every sacrifice, everything had served to unite them in a way that time would never be able to separate. The people of the area, who once only saw Silas as the lonely rancher, now saw him as a man who had been reborn. And by his side, Clara, the young woman who dared to defy fate, became a symbol of courage. Together they showed that even in the midst of the greatest pain, love can blossom. That night, lying on the porch, Clara whispered. If you save me, Silas, I'll be your wife until the end of my days. He held her hand to his chest and replied in a voice choked with emotion. And I, who trembled at hearing those words, promise to never let go of your hand again. And so the silence of solitude was replaced by the song of life, by laughter, by sharing. The ranch that was once marked by pain was now a memory of a new beginning, a love born in fire, watered with tears, but that grew strong like a root in dry earth. And it's with this ending that our story concludes, leaving a message that touches the heart. No matter how much suffering tries to break us, it's often in it that we find the strength to be happy. Now, I want to hear from you what you thought of this story. Leave your opinion in the comments. Like this video. Subscribe to Windswept Tales to follow more emotional stories, and share it with someone you love. And don't forget, click on the next story, because I'll be there waiting for you for another emotional journey. See you there.